Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Izu Islands. Miyagejima is one of Japan's Izu Islands and one of the most toxic places in the world. It's not toxic because of the people who live there, but rather because of the volatile volcano that won't stop erupting. The people who live on Miyagejima are under constant threat of being boiled alive by lava. Either that or suffocated to death by sulfuric gas. The island is part of a volcanic chain that has erupted 6 times in the last 100 years. That's a little more than once every 2 decades. And because the whole area is so active volcanically, sulfur gas continuously seeps through the ground like a deadly fog. The last mass evacuation was in the year 2000. Mount Oyama erupted multiple times in a row, causing dangerously high levels of toxic gas to flood the island like a solid mist. Everyone had to leave, and all flights were banned for 8 years. That's how long it took for the toxic gas to diminish enough that the residents could return to their homes. Would you dare to go back after this? Let me know in the comments below. Number 9. The Hermit on Sokotra Island. Sokotra Island is one of the strangest and most magical places in the world. It's off the northwestern tip of Yemen and occupied by very few people. One of them is a mysterious hermit. He lives alone in an isolated cave, fishing with his hands and living a life of utter solitude. His name is Eli, and it's just kind of an accepted thing that he lives there by himself. The island is situated between Somalia and Yemen, right at the precipice where the Arabian Sea bleeds into the Indian Ocean. It is so isolated that scientists estimate 90% of its life forms don't live anywhere else on the planet. It has a surreal landscape with dragon's blood trees and thousands of bright blue crabs that scuttle in the moonlight. Sokotra Island truly seems like a completely different planet. Or at least, it has the landscape of a different planet. The hermit known as Eli lives near Detwa Lagoon in a dark cave. But he isn't the only person here. He was once married to one of the other residents of the island. He and his wife had 12 children, but only 6 of them survived due to the harsh conditions on the island. The first medical facility didn't open until 2012, and it's still not exactly the most equipped hospital in the world. Number 8. Sable Island. Sable Island is one of the most mysterious pieces of land in Canada. It's about 200 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia, with its treacherous waters responsible for an estimated 350 shipwrecks. The bottom of the ocean surrounding the island is reportedly littered with gold and silver, the skeletal remains of sailors, and broken pieces of ships. Sable Island is an inhospitable place where no human has dared to live. The only things that live on the island are the wild horses. It's one of few places left on the planet where horses still roam free. Strangely enough, there's not a single tree on the island. It's less than 1 mile wide in the middle and only about 25 miles long. But it does have enough grass to feed the local horses. Since 2013, Parks Canada has been managing the island very carefully. It's a national park reserve, and visitors are only allowed during the summer, and only with special permission. You can only stay in a designated campsite, and you can't leave or take anything with you, not so much as a grain of sand. As for the mysteries of the island, there is no shortage. It was first recorded on maps in 1502, but nobody knows who discovered it. Some say the Vikings, others say it was the Basques of Spain. There was a brief colony in the 1550s, but the conditions were so unbearable that the settlers gave up. It's also been a sailor's nightmare. Hundreds of ships have been wrecked just trying to sail near the island. That's because there is a continental shelf hiding beneath the water that's about the size of the Grand Canyon, creating vortexes and shifting sandbars that wreck all the vessels. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Mitch Campbell and Richard Junkermeyer for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries and mysterious places. Number 7. Uros Islands. The Uros Islands can be found floating on the surface of Lake Titicaca on the Peruvian side. The Uros people believe themselves to be descendants of the first inhabitants of the area, long before the Inca ever came to dominate the region. As a form of protection, the Uros built mobile islands from the totora plant. This special plant allows their islands to float. If they feel like they're in danger, they can push their floating homes away from shore and vanish into the misty interior of the lake. Sadly for the Uros, this method didn't really work. The Inca and the Spanish still found them and almost destroyed them. What's really amazing about the floating islands here is that they've been around for over 1,000 years, maybe even a lot longer. The Uros survived by fishing, gathering bird eggs, and hiding in their floating houses. But it's not just their houses that float, it's the entire village. Over 2,000 people once lived on the floating platforms, and today there are still 1,200 people living there now. They used to live closer to the middle of the lake, but had to relocate nearer to the shore after a brutal storm in 1986 almost destroyed their floating villages. They are currently split up between 4 major settlements on the lake. Number 6. Newfoundland and the Irish monks. After the Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Christianity was kept alive by some really unexpected groups. One of them was at the edge of the world in Western Ireland. Monks who had devoted themselves to Christianity in the first centuries after the death of Jesus Christ kept the tradition going. These medieval monks moved into cave monasteries along the Irish coast. They also ventured out into the waters and built honeycomb dwellings to live on isolated islands. Some of them even sailed to North America. Saint Brendan is believed to have discovered North America long before anyone else from Europe. However, it's never been authenticated. We know Saint Brendan was born in Ireland around the year 489. He founded the monastery at Clonfert in Galway, but when Saint Brendan reached his 70s, he decided to go on a spiritual voyage. He and 17 other monks got into rough wooden boats and set sail across the North Atlantic. They were gone for 7 years. During their voyage, the monks supposedly discovered a mysterious island, which they believed was the land of promise for the Christian people. They discovered precious stones and mysterious fruits and returned to Europe with them as proof. Many scholars believe Saint Brendan and his monks discovered the island of Newfoundland. This is the same island that was discovered by Vikings about 500 years later. If true, it would mean that Saint Brendan, an Irish monk, found North America 1,000 years before Christopher Columbus. It's actually very possible. In 1976, adventurer Tim Severin set out to prove the myth of Saint Brendan and his mystery island. He built a replica of the boat that would have been used by the Irish monks and sailed it across the Atlantic to Newfoundland. This proved once and for all that Irish monks really could have found North America 1,500 years before today. Number 5. The Isle of Demons. There is an island off the coast of Newfoundland, that same island visited by Saint Brendan and his monks 1,500 years ago. The island is called the Isle of Demons, and chatter began to spread in the 16th century that anyone who ventured near the island heard the voices of evil spirits. In 1424, the island appeared for the first time on a map created by the Venetian cartographer Giovanni Pizzigano. It appeared again on another map in 1508, and once more in 1556, thanks to a map published by Giacomo Gastaldi. But it wasn't until the later part of the 16th century the rumors began circulating about the island. There was news in 1542 that a woman named Marguerite de la Roque embarked upon a voyage with her uncle. During the voyage, she fell in love with a sailor and the two became romantic. The uncle disapproved of the relationship, and so he abandoned Marguerite and the sailor on the Isle of Demons. The sailor died, and so too did the child Marguerite was carrying. But after spending 2 years on the island, she escaped thanks to a passing fisherman. After that, people began to associate the island with demons and evil spirits. Nobody would go near it anymore because it was said that if a vessel drifted too close, they could be confused by the voices of the spirits and shipwrecked. Number 4. Hog Island. In 1956, Hog Island was being torn apart. The small island in the Chesapeake Bay was being bludgeoned by waves from the Atlantic Ocean. It was in the midst of disintegrating, something that happens to islands as the water levels change and the topography of our planet morphs. But this was a weird situation because the island had bodies buried on it. Human corpses were being thrust out of their graves by the waves as the island broke apart. One of these bodies belonged to George Avery Melvin, who died in 1934. This wouldn't have been big news if not for the fact that George's body was perfectly preserved. He'd been dead for 22 years, but hadn't decayed at all. To this day, we still don't know what happened to George. Bob Smith, a Coast Guard who had been on patrol that morning, said George's body was solid as a rock. He had turned stiff and hard as if preserved in a plaster casing, yet he was the only one like that. No one has ever been able to find out why George's body naturally petrified. Number 3. High Brazil. High Brazil is a mythical island that may secretly exist off the coast of Ireland. In Celtic folklore, the island is said to be completely covered in mist, except for on a single day once every 7 years. That's the only time it becomes visible, and yet it still cannot be physically reached. Those who live on the island are supposedly descendants of the old Irish clans of Brea Sail, who occupied Ireland thousands of years ago and then fled to their own secret island. Despite the name High Brazil, the cloaked island has no connection at all to the country of Brazil. But this is where things get really strange. The island is obviously mythical, and yet there also seems to be proof of it in the real world. In 1325, Angelino Dulcert created a map with a small island labeled Brasile to the west of Ireland. And in 1436, Andrea Bianco made a similar map showing yet another island called Insula de Brasil in the same spot. It happened again in 1480. But despite every attempt at finding the island, it has remained elusive. Maps all the way up until 1865 showed a mysterious island off the coast of Ireland. But as far as history books are concerned, no one has ever stepped foot on it. Number 2. The shocking discovery of Easter Island. Even if you're familiar with Easter Island, you might not know how truly shocking its discovery was approximately 300 years ago. In 1722, curious explorers came across an unidentified rock in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. They docked their ships and began to explore the island. It must have been like they were transported to an alien world. The explorers found over 800 gigantic statues, every single one almost identical, and not a single living soul. It was an island covered in eroded, megalithic faces left behind by a long-since extinct civilization. The mystery of Easter Island baffled the experts for centuries. It's 1,000 miles from any other piece of land, 1,400 miles from mainland South America. That makes it one of the most remote places in the world. And yet, between 600 and 800 AD, a group of Polynesians settled the island after sailing from an unknown starting point. These people called the island Rapa Nui. It was named Easter Island because Jacob Roggeveen found the deserted island on Easter Sunday, 300 years later, and the mystery still hasn't been solved. We know the gigantic statues were likely made to represent ancestral chiefs, who were thought to be descendants of gods. But what happened to the people of Rapa Nui, whether they suffered famine, used up all their resources, or simply left, is still unknown. Number 1. Berlenga Islands. The Berlenga Islands off the coast of Portugal have been visited and occasionally inhabited by humans since the days of the Romans. Monks have lived here, pirates seeking sanctuary from the French and British navies, even Vikings stopped by on the islands for a bit of respite from all of their pillaging. Monks settled on the islands and built the monastery of the Misericordia da Berlenga. They stayed there until the 16th century when an outbreak of disease spread across the island. The disease killed almost everyone who didn't flee. The most famous installation is the Fort of São João Baptista das Berlengas. The fortress is located on the largest island of the Berlengas archipelago, once used to defend the coastline of Portugal. Construction of the fortress was ordered by King Manuel in 1502. So remember the monastery I just told you about? The one where the monks were infected with disease and forced to abandon it? Well, the fortress was built over the remains of the abandoned monastery. Even though the fortress was supposed to begin construction in 1502, nothing happened until 1651. Construction began in earnest in 1666, and the fortress was used later that same year to stop an attack by the Spanish fleet. A group of ships had been sent to kidnap Queen Maria Francisca of Savoy, but the newly constructed fortress stopped the invaders. It was completed in 1678, later occupied by British troops, and remodeled in 1821. The fort was used briefly during the Liberal Wars by supporters of Pedro IV of Portugal. Then it lost its usefulness and was abandoned. Then, in 1953, entrepreneurs tried to turn it into a hotel. This place was really popular. Thanks for watching! Which of these strange islands would you prefer to be stranded on? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Come back soon! Bye!